Hi, welcome to the Bottle Talk and to another episode of our winemaker series. Today we have a very special guest, Karoline Walch from Elena Walch Wines. Her winemaking family legacy in Alto Adige, Italy is multiple generations. We'll discuss the benefits and drawbacks to making wine at what's probably the northernmost reaches of Italy for viticulture. Her contagious compassion for sustainable viticulture and thinking beyond oneself to the future generations is fantastic. The importance of local yeast and lees aging decisions she'll discuss, and also some interesting varieties that you may or may not have ever heard of, Schiava and Bronner. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Karoline Walch. I have some questions for you, and I appreciate, Karoline, first let me say I know winemakers are extremely busy people. I think you go to sleep at night dreaming about wine, and you wake up in the morning dreaming about wine.
Exactly.
So I appreciate you taking the time with me today.
Of course, my pleasure.
We just mentioned about how beautiful and diverse Alto Adige is. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, obviously there's advantages and disadvantages to growing in an area with the climate, diverse soils, altitude that Alto Adige has. Can you explain to our viewers what are some of the advantages and what are some of the disadvantages of viticulture in that area?
Yeah, Dennis, first of all, perhaps we should say like where Alto Adige is, which is Alto Adige is the northernmost wine growing region in Italy, right? So we are bordering to Austria and Switzerland right at the foothills of the Dolomites. So it's really way up north, right? It's the northernmost region. And it's a small region, by the way. It's tiny. We only contribute to less than 1% to the total Italian wine production. So we're small. And hence, being so far north, obviously we have some challenges. But overall, I have to say the advantages outweigh by far the disadvantages. And also historically, Alto Adige has always been this area where viticulture has always happened. And even the Roman, when the Romans arrived in Alto Adige, they were surprised to see that viticulture was happening already, right? And hence, we have a long history in making wine and in viticulture, and really, it's a fantastic place to be growing vines for several reasons. Because yes, we are way north, right? We're very north, but we have the Dolomites, the Alps that protect us from all the bad weather coming from the north. So just think that an hour from where I am, viticulture is not possible. It's way too cold. Like you'd go over the Brenner Pass and you're almost in Innsbruck, for example, and it's way too cold there to grow vines, any sort of vines. So this is how far north we are, and this is how important those Alps are, because they protect us from all the bad weather coming from the north. But at the same time, we're open to the south for all the Mediterranean climate to come in. And this makes Alto Adige really unique because, yes, we are way north. Yes, it gets very cold in wintertime. But in summertime and during growing season, we're open for the south, for the Mediterranean, for the warmer climate to come in. And hence what you see is actually that, and actually interestingly, Alto Adige in summertime, think of that, is one of the hottest summertime places in all of Italy. So the city of Bolzano is one of the hottest cities in all of Italy during summertime. So if you come here in July during the day, it gets as warm as it does get down south. But, and here's the point, the unique thing is that it gets very cold at night. And these temperature fluctuations, because of the influence that I was just saying, is key. And this is something that you'll see then in our wines, because it's easy for us, fairly easy for us, despite being so far north, ripening the varieties, but at the same time retaining the acidity. And this is really the beauty of Alto Adige, I would say, and hence this cool climate that we definitely have, but still we're never struggling with reaching optimal maturity, but yet we retain the acidity. So it's really a beautiful place to be growing vines, and it's a I shouldn't say too often probably, but it's a fairly easy area. Easy meaning for the weather conditions, right, to be growing vines, right? But it's not easy when it comes to the steepness of our sites, because as you can imagine, in Alto Adige, viticulture becomes difficult, not necessarily because of the weather, because we have about 300 days of sunshine, we have about 800 millimeters of rain. That's good. That's not too much. That's not, that's perfect, really. But what becomes challenging in Alto Adige is certainly the steepness of the vineyards and the steepness the slopes that we have to cope with, because some of our sites actually has a steepness of 63 degrees of steepness. That's for example our vineyard Castel, where we plant our Gewürztraminer. So obviously everything you do there is done manually. I mean, or most of it is done manually, or you have those certain type of, not kind of tractors, but I don't know the English word, where they kind of, it's all terraced, and it's really challenging to work those vineyards. And if you ask me what are the challenges in viticulture, probably my answer is the steepness of the slopes.
Now that makes perfect sense. One of the things that when I did a little background and research on what you guys were doing there, I found it extremely refreshing, because not only were you doing sustainability in the vineyards with a lot of things that you do, but I mean, to the point where even the packaging and the shipping and some things like that, really, really cool stuff that you guys were doing. So I was going to ask you, along those lines of sustainability, what are some of the greatest challenges you have for maintaining sustainability in that sort of area? Like what sort of pests and problems do you have in the vineyard that you find hard to control, but still be sustainable?
Yeah, so as you said, for us, sustainability is a huge topic, and it's really a belief, and it's part of our core identity. And hence, as you said, we try to follow it all the way through, from the vineyards to the production, so in the cellar, but also to the commercial side of wine. Our idea is to be a good company in all its ways, right? And we're a family-owned estate, and I'm lucky to be in the 5th generation, and hopefully my estate will be given on to the 6th and 7th generation, and probably, and hopefully even many more to come. So it's obvious that many things that we do at the winery are with a long-term thinking, right? And obviously everything we do is really for the next generation. And even if we today still buy some new lands, it's probably not my generation that makes the profit out of it. It's really the next generation, because land, for example, in Alto Adige is very expensive, and hence really everything we do is to be a good company, and we know that our riches and our wealth is the soil. And hence sustainability is obvious that we do it, right? And there are many things that we do, and we have a long list of the things that we do. And I always say that for us, sustainability is never a status that you can ever tick off and say, okay, now I'm sustainable, and that's it. But it's always, it's in a continuous evolution, and every year and ever so often we try to add new things, and we hear about new things, we try out new things. It's in constant evolution, because we want to be a good company in all its ways. And for us, it's essential to preserve whatever we have for the next generations to come. And hence, in the viticulture, obviously, that's where sustainability is key, right? And there are many things that we do, and that are very important to us. And obviously, one of the first things that comes into my mind, and it's something that we started doing many years ago already, is that we don't use any herbicides anymore. Meaning that obviously everything we do is done like mechanically. And obviously, what does that mean? And that's one of the difficulties. Yes, you have to be there more often, right? And everything doing by mowing, for example, and that's obviously much more labor intensive. And that's probably one of the difficulties when we talk about sustainability. And difficulties is that what we see is that it's not the sustainable project in the vineyards is not necessarily difficult for us because of the weather, but more because of the labor. You need much more labor. You need more people that go into the vineyards more often, right? And that's probably the biggest challenge. And what next step to it is the fact that in Alto Adige you have very many small parcels of land, and even our estate we have so many different small plots of lands, right? They're all in and around the same area, but they're not together. Like for example, our major vineyard is the vineyard Castel Ringberg, which has 20 hectares just in one piece. Now you might think, well, 20 hectares is not that much, and if you think of Tuscany or Puglia or Sicily, 20 hectares just in one piece is I wouldn't say normal, but it is very often found. But that's not the case in Alto Adige, because having 20, this actually is the largest single vineyard in Alto Adige, so having 20 hectares just in one piece. Because generally a farmer here owns 1 hectare, and that's even spread around, right? So having 20 in one piece is considerable. But still, so we have 20 hectares in one piece, but then we have altogether, we work with 65 hectares of land. And hence most of the other vineyards are all scattered around, and they're small bits and pieces. Meaning you need more labor, but you need also more machineries, because it's not that you have one vineyard where you have one, garage where exactly. Yeah. So you need to go from one vineyard to the next, and just before the rain comes. So this management is probably for us the most challenging thing when it comes to sustainability in the vineyards.
And something that you touched on that I want to re-emphasize. And I think it's such a forward thinking, and it's so refreshing to hear this, because we're so caught up, I think, in the world that especially younger generations are looking at what can I get now? What can I get now? And the fact that you mentioned that that the process that you're doing there and what your family's doing, and that you've been there for 5 generations, but everything that you do now is forward thinking of how is that going to impact, what are we leaving for the next generation? And I think that if every company and everybody thought that way, boy, what a better world it would be.
What a better, right?
I'll tell you, it sure would.
We're trying to do a tiny impact.
That's right. Maybe other companies could need to look at the wine industry and start focusing on how they do things. Huh? That's right.
I like that.
I tell you, one of the things that, as I was researching, that I thought was very interesting and very unusual, it was the Bronner variety that you were working with.
Yeah. Exactly.
Wow, how interesting and obscure and really cool. I find myself.
Have you tasted Bronner before?
I've not. I've read about it. I've never tasted it.
Okay, so Bronner is again part of this sustainability program that we have, and it's a variety that we planted. Hang on, I have to think now. So I remember the first vintage that we did was 2014, because I remember that very well, because it was a challenging year, because that year we actually did have more rain than usual. And so that was the first vintage that was planted 3 years before. And so Bronner is this variety. It's actually a German variety that was introduced, or it was I should say invented in Germany, in Freiburg, after many years of doing research, where they wanted to find a variety that was resistant to the various fungal diseases in the vineyards. And hence, after many crossings, they came out with this new variety that is a cross between the Vitis vinifera and the Vitis asiatica. And this last one, the Vitis asiatica, is resistant against all these fungal diseases. And hence, Bronner, named after the founder, was born. And it's a variety that is really planted in a tiniest amounts around the world, and most of it is found in Germany and a little bit in northern Italy, so in Alto Adige. And for us, it's very interesting, because, as I say, it's a variety that does not need to be treated at all. So if you think of, being an organic winery, for example, you still are allowed to use copper and sulfur in your vineyards, right? But with Bronner, not even that is necessary, meaning nothing. And and this is really, really interesting for us, and that's why I wanted to try it out. And I can confirm it's a fantastic grape variety that is very easy to handle in the vineyards. And even in a difficult year like the first vintage that we did was 2014, it coped very well with the kind of more of the And if you think of the variety, think more of when I describe the variety, it kind of reminds me, it goes more into the direction of Pinot, aroma-wise, Pinot Bianco and Müller-Thurgau, kind of in that direction. So it has kind of the structure a little bit of the Pinot Bianco, but it has the aromatics more of a Müller-Thurgau, right? So it's a little bit more aromatic on the nose, but a nice structure. But still, you'll see that if you taste it, to me, it always has this, and not necessarily meaning a bad thing, but you'll see in a way that it's not 100% Vitis vinifera. There is something to it that it's hard to describe for me, that you realize, okay, this is not 100% Vitis vinifera, which is something that we're not used to, right? But it's very interesting, and so we only produce, something like 3,000 bottles a year, so small. But it's a variety that obviously we don't export much, because it's or at all, actually, I should say, because it's a variety that is still, unfortunately, not very well known, not known at all. Like if you said you've never tasted it, so that means a lot. So it's a tiny variety, right? And hence we sell it most through our cellar door. And but when people come by, when you actually have the time to explain people what this is and why we did it and what we're trying out to do, then people love it. And it's a great wine. It's a wine that it's really made to be drunk young. It's stainless steel only. But it's a neat variety. Yeah.
Well, I think that's great that it seems in a time that we are dangerously close to heading towards a vineyard monoculture in the world of wine, that everyone's grubbing up these ancient and indigenous and amazing varietals to plant more, and I hate the word international varietal, but more accepted and more noticed varietals to be able to market those. So I think it's especially interesting that you are creating a niche for this varietal, much like, not too many places in the world that you'll find Schiava, but what an interesting and fascinating grape. And the fact that those are still being produced, I think the more we can get those varietals into the hands of consumers and let them appreciate these kind of varietals, then maybe we'll be able to kind of save some of the diversity that we have in the wine industry.
I totally agree, Dennis. And that's really the beauty of wine, right? There are so many varieties, and it's important to preserve them.
That's right. And I will dedicate my life to trying each and every one of those if I ever can. Well, there's some other things that you've done. Walk me through, because I went through and read some of the changes that you did with your 2015 Cellar updates, and
Correct.
really, really neat stuff. And if you would walk us through sort of some of the changes you made, and with the idea of the gentle handling that you do with the grapes coming in, and how has that changed and impacted your final wine?
Yes, so in 2015, we built this new fermentation cellar, and it was just finished right before vintage. So we were stressing all the construction people that when you have a winery, you kind of, that's the cellar, that's the fermentation cellar. It needed to be ready. So it took not quite a year to build it, or 10 months. Anyway, so we were ready by August, pretty much, and it's a new fermentation cellar, and that again goes in line with the sustainability idea, because our idea was to make a new fermentation cellar where we needed to intervene as little as possible, and this is really the approach that we have in the vineyards already, right? Let the vineyard regulate itself. If you have a healthy and biodiverse vineyard, it will regulate itself, and that was a little bit the idea also with this new cellar. We wanted to have a new cellar where we continued this thought that we have in the vineyards also in the cellar, and hence everything there is gravity driven, right? So it needed to be a very, very gentle process. Obviously, if you can imagine, the more you pump, the more stressed the grapes are, and the more bitter phenolics you will get out. That's not something that we wanted. So we wanted to have it all gravity flown, and so gravity driven. And so grapes arrive on the top and kind of step by step keep falling down, right, through the various processes. And then we also have the possibility. The new fermentation cellar also gives us the flexibility of working the different varieties and vineyard plots separately and differently. Meaning working with whole bunches, slightly crushed grapes, or whole berries. Kind of, we have various possibilities to kind of handle those grapes that arrive differently, and this is especially interesting for the reds. And in the end, we also have a sorting table, basically. And before the sorting table, we have some mechanical checks for quality checks, basically. So generally, you'll have the sorting table that is your where you control the quality. So basically, what goes essentially in the bottle. But we have even more steps beforehand that mechanically, right? There's a system that mechanically, for example, the green grapes, meaning the ones that are unripe, fall through and are being, discarded. So, so this, together with the sorting table, really, in order to have only the best grapes and berries in the final wine. And so, really, this was the idea when we started planning this new fermentation cellar, and overall with the idea to intervene as little as possible and to have wines and have a cellar that gave us the flexibility, right? And what we see now in the wines, and especially in the red wines, and that's really, it was driven more for the red wines, is that we now have, like, even on this of the same plot, working it differently, right? Because those barrels are small, those tanks, I should say. So stainless steel tanks, they hold 42 hectoliters of wine, so fairly small. So we can, from a same plot, vinify it differently. And what we see, for example, that with a whole bunch, like the structure, you can do so much on the structure and on the fruit side spectrum of the wine. And we see that working with whole bunches, you'll get a beautiful, very long and vertical, like on the nose. Perhaps it's lacking a little bit of the structure, and hence we use also some slightly crushed ones. And hence it's great to really play around and try out and find the right blend for this one wine.
So as a winemaker, it really, a painting analogy, it gives you more of a spectrum of opportunities for that fractionalized blending. So you can actually take the best of those different plots and put those together, and, like I said, build more complexity, and rather than manipulating the wine, you're able to blend it to get the final product you want, rather than
and also what we see then is what we also see is, for example, that the wines, after they complete fermentation in those stainless steel tanks, then they're being put into the barrique barrels, into the small barrels. And what we find is that the wine, once it goes into the barrels, is much how should I say it, cleaner right away. So these wines, where in the past we had to kind of do like pump them over or kind of change barrels and so on, they stay in that same one barrel up until basically they're being we do the final blend, and then it's being sent off to bottling, right? And hence, again, it worked. Like we intervene much less than what we used to do before, and that's great.
Do you think the barrel, rather than having to pump back and forth and being aggressive with the wine, do you think the barrel, you get a little micro oxygenation? Is that why you're getting a little more integration and stability?
Maybe also that's a small something that will help, but really what we see is that the wine is just cleaner.
Okay.
Like on the yeast that it's, yeah, for sure.
Okay, great. Yeah. And when you do some lees aging, right? You do some aging on the lees.
Yes.
Do you find that you have to go and stir that? Do you have any reduction issues with that at
all?
Or?
You know, that all depends on the varieties. And sometimes, yes, on some varieties more, on some we do it less. It depends also on the style of wine that you want to make. On the whites, for example, on some Chardonnays, obviously we do it more. On others, we don't, and some varieties you know, tend to be very reductive, like the Schiava, so we have to be very careful there. And hence so it really depends on the variety and the style of wine that we essentially want to make.
Okay, very good. Now you did mention some whole cluster and whole berry, and I know that you use that with your Schiava sometimes, don't you, as well? With
Schiava, it's really mainly for the Pinot Noir.
Okay.
Yeah, mainly.
Can you explain can you explain, other than gentle pressing and creating good drainage channels mechanically with that in there, can you explain with the whole cluster and the stem inclusion what that adds to the final wine for your production?
With the stem inclusion? Yeah. So what that means is that the wine definitely has I should say a completely different structure in a way that you'll in the final wine, if you do it in a bad way, so go to the extreme, you'll see some kind of harsh greenish notes to it.
Yes.
But that's when it's done bad, right?
Yes.
But essentially what you want is this pure fruit. When we're talking about the red wines, more on the light red wine spectrum.
Okay, great. Yeah. I think it's wonderful too. It seems that when you have good lignification, where the stems are good and ripe, that it almost adds a little bit of a interesting spice component and earthy component too, which is really, I find that
and we love it for the blending, right? So on the Pinot Noir, we never do 100% because that will be too much. And also, as you just said, it's very important to get the ripeness correct, because you cannot do it in every year, right? If you have the stems that are not ripe enough, then you have a problem, and you couldn't do it, right? Then you get the bad example that I was explaining before.
Yes.
So it's not a rule that we can do it every year. Yes.
No, and that's a shame. You taste some of those wines that someone took the time to pick whole cluster, and then you taste it and you went, ooh, wow, that is really green. That's unfortunate. Exactly. And it does happen. It does make it out to the store shelves, which is kind of surprising, but yes, it does. Yes.
I agree.
You are up at such a high altitude, and you mentioned all those sunny days that you have. Now, the good thing, like you said, maintain good acidity afterwards because of that diurnal temperature range, that difference between daytime and nighttime temperature. But because those grapes get so ripe, do you ever have any issues with alcohol? Do you ever have any times when at the alcohol level, when you're getting ripeness with alcohol before phenolic ripeness?
Not too much, Dennis, actually. And we don't seem to have that kind of contradiction, really. And it's Alto Adige is a great place to be growing vines. And so for us, really, growing system, it really depends on the season, but like on the year, on the vintage. But this is generally not really the issue. Obviously, I mean, it gets warmer, and we see the wines now and see the ones from, say, 20 years ago. Yes, we do see that the alcohol level in the final wine is probably
a little,
it's higher, right? It's higher, that's for sure. And we also see that we have to harvest a little bit earlier, probably about, on average, my generation would harvest 2 weeks earlier than the generation of my parents.
Interesting.
Right? So that's the climate change and how that infected the wines. And but overall, despite that, the growing season is still long enough where we can really find phenolic ripeness, but still retain the acidity because of these huge temperature fluctuations. Because really during the day here, it can get up to 32 degrees, so it's warm, but at nighttime it goes back to 12 degrees, or 10 degrees. So it's really this diurnal shift that really makes this a wonderful place really to be growing vines. And hence, No, answering your question, this is not a problem for us, and also acidity wise, we seem to find great levels. Yes.
Yeah, that acidity wise, it's funny because if I look at any of the great wine regions around the world, it seems like the best wines seem to be made at the northern hemisphere wise, at the northernmost ability to grow grapes. That where like you said, if you go an hour further north, you can't grow them. It seems like the most interesting wines get made right in that on that borderline, where they can go. And the idea of not having to acidify, to me, blind tasting wines and going through it, there's an integration of acidity that I can't quite put can't quite put into words, other than the fact that it seems like the acidity is sort of a clothing rack that all these other things are hung on, all these other aspects of the different components of the wine. Whereas those people who do acidify, especially acidify a lot, to me, it seems that there's a disjointed acidity.
I agree.
There.
Sometimes it's kind of almost annoying. You have it there and it's not part of the wine.
Right. Instead of layering over, it's over by itself. But when you look at all the numbers in a laboratory, all the numbers look great. It should be perfect, right? But tasting it almost, and I don't know if this is going to translate. This is sort of a colloquialistic American thing, but are you familiar with Flintstone vitamins?
No.
Okay. It has this sort of harsh vitamin water component to it. Like if you took a vitamin and chewed it up in your mouth, that sort of weird flavor. Yeah. I get that on people when they over acidify. Instantly when I taste it, I go, "Oh, tastes like vitamin."
I'll have to look for it.
Well, some of the things I thought was very fascinating, and this is going to be geeky. So for our listeners out there, and I don't know if this is going to translate or not, but we try to cover as much as we can. But also, they're working with American Wine Society. There are some winemakers that I talk to, and that they're very interested in some of the geeky components to it. But I find it fascinating that you did some extractions of local indigenous yeasts. And worked very hard to get those for certain parameters that you were working for. Can you touch on that a little bit? And believe me, if you want to throw some certain yeast profiles out there on my website, what I do is anything that we've explained, like why diurnal temperature ranges are important, with glyconeogenesis and how the grape, but I'll put some of that geeky stuff on to explain some of that. So even if you do touch on certain yeast types, I'll make sure that we put stuff on there that will explain it to people who might not understand. So I'm gonna.
Okay, great. Yeah, so it's actually a project that we started several years ago already, and actually we started it in the year 2015, right, when we did the new fermentation cellar that we were just talking about beforehand. And why did we do that? Because I mean, wine fermentation, that's like the big thing now, right? Or it has been for the past few years already. But very often, right, even if you do a wild fermentation, but you have been fermenting, with inoculated yeast, how do you say, with
inoculated,
with commercial yeast, it's really one type of yeast that in the end does the fermentation, and it's the one that you have been using for the past 20 years in your cellar, right? And hence what we started doing is with the new fermentation cellar, we had a completely neutral, sterile place where we started vinifying. And then what we did is we, together with the San Michele school, which is an important famous school of enology here in the area, and together with them we did this project where we vinified wild, so naturally, some Sauvignon, some Lagrein, and the Gewürztraminer, so 3 varieties. And meaning that we fermented it all not to dryness with about something like 100 grams of sugars left, and then they took that sample, right, and analyzed which of the yeast strains were able to cope with obviously the higher levels in the alcohol level, the increased level in alcohol. And the result was that they were actually very very happy, and even they said it was amazing for them to do this project, to do it with a completely new fermentation cellar, because they said they found so many various yeast strains, right, that they found. Obviously, the ones that survived up until the very end is still the Saccharomyces cerevisiae. I don't know the English term. How do you say that?
That's right. Saccharomyces
cerevisiae.
Saccharomyces.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Sorry, my pronunciation wasn't good there. And so it was that, and that survived, but very many families of it, right? We couldn't tell you exactly which ones, but they confirmed that it was very many, and they said that it's unique to have that kind of experiment in a completely new and neutral winery.
That's very fascinating because
meaning that what, sorry to interrupt you, but meaning that we were really able to bring what we have in the vineyards, the yeast from the vineyards in the cellar, and then we're able to select the ones that were able to cope with wine, essentially, right? To bring fermentation to the end, because you want in the end you need a yeast that is able to cope and complete fermentation, right? And and then we continued this project with them, and then they analyzed the various yeast strains, and then we were able to get it in kind of first in a liquid form and then in a dry form. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, because I think that's something that people forget about or fail to understand, that they talk about soil and about how important the soil and the growing area and all those other things are. But one of the things that they fail to leave out is indigenous yeast is so specific to those certain areas. So it's interesting to me that you took the time to go and find those yeast that were living there, and especially the ones that could survive, because a lot of people say, well, we use indigenous yeast, that are in our area. Yes, but as soon as the alcohol starts to build, those all die off, and you have Saccharomyces. They're the ones that. So the fact that they're living to the end of fermentation, which really means that they are contributory in some of the flavor and aromatic profiles in there. So
totally, and that they are unique to us and to our sites, because they come. It's a neutral praise. We started from scratch, neutral praise, and it's the ones from the vineyards, and hence we're very proud of it, and it's a great project that we did, and that we still can use those yeasts.
Well, as you should be, because I think, like I said, it adds to the specificity of that area. That there's not another area that has not only the soil structure and all the different things that you do, which makes a wine unique to that area, but also the yeast. That just adds another layer of uniqueness that you have for those wines. So it's very special. It's very interesting interesting and geeky in a good way that you took the time to do all that. So I think that's really cool. That's really cool.
Great.
This is one of the questions that I have, and I asked this because I'm actually interested in Sauvignon from different areas of the world and how winemakers make this. So I'm not sure in your area if many winemakers take the time to look at thiol levels in your Sauvignon. Do you do that at all? It's okay.
We don't do it at all. And I was discussing also internally with the Cellar, and somebody looked at me and said, that must be a new world wine question, because we like it, and it's like we're talking internally, and we were like, no, that's something we've never even considered. I mean, heard of it in a way, but never considered. And it's really and you're right. I mean, on the Sauvignon Blanc, that's such a key, it's such a delicate variety. At the same time, it can be such a pungent grape variety. So you really have to get many things right. And it's really difficult sometimes to kind of find the right balance in such a wine with such, extreme aromatics that you can find. But really for us, and the key thing is really going by taste, right? You have to taste the grapes. You have to especially also on the Sauvignon, bite on the pips inside, and chew on the skin, and it's really kind of, and also really heritage, and what we know from that certain parcel, knowing our vineyards very well is also key. And what we see is that certainly with the challenge with Sauvignon is that to get that all right, we need to go through the same vineyard 2-3 times, depending on vintage, maybe even 4 times, right? To get the ripeness that we desire.
That makes sense. Yes, absolutely. But there's a couple of geeky questions that I ask winemakers. I do that if they're growing anything where there's a increased succinic acid level, like for Albareños and things like that, where you get a sort of a salty bryness. I ask them the same question about that if they measure their succinic acid levels. And
what did they say?
Most of the time they look at me and they go, we never thought about doing that.
Right. Yeah, it's for us. It's too. We go by taste. We trust on us.
Those questions are the results of me with my nose in vinification chemistry books relating to studying for MW, where you get the obscure questions that winemakers look at you and go, no, we don't do that.
What? Totally.
Okay. Another question, and we touched on this a little bit, but what was your, obviously you came on board after multiple generations of winemakers and viticulture and the land being worked and such. As far as bringing new varieties on or experimenting with different things, what do you have in the pipeline? That are there certain small areas of vineyards that you're experimenting with new varietals or trying to see how things work? And I'm just interested in those kind of things, what you're doing with that.
Yeah. So, as a winery, there are always things that you're trying out and trying to do new things, because also going back to what I said in the very beginning, this long-term thinking, everything is so slow in wine. It takes so long, and it takes years, if you plant a vineyard from scratch, and it takes really years to make a very important wine out of that land. So you have to start early, right? One thing that is current, and what we started just a couple of years ago, is that we have a new vineyard on a very high altitude, on 1,000 meters. So that's something like 3,000 feet almost. And now that's very extreme here in Alto Adige, because again, remember how far north we are. And then even on 1,000 meters, on 3,000 feet, that's extreme, right? So that's extreme winemaking up there. So we have 5 hectares of land up there. We've planted it for the most part, with Pinot Bianco and Pinot Noir, and just a little bit of Pinot Grigio to try it. And this was, I have to think, this was the time is flying, second vintage that we got. Yeah, must be the second vintage of grapes that we harvested. And it's very interesting, and it's definitely an investment for the future. Right now, what we see is that obviously the acidity is very high. We get the ripeness, but it's there pretty much a month behind all the other varieties that we plant on the vineyards here in this area, man. Right?
Wow.
So, 1 month. Last year, was it last year or 2 years ago? I don't remember. No, 2 years ago in May, we still got snow up there. So it's extreme vineyard, right? It's very extreme.
Oh man.
But we want to experiment, right? So right now, it's very high. We have high acidity. We still have enough fruit, but at the moment it's still blended in all our other wines. But the aim is really down the road to be able to vinify them really complete, like not only vinify them separately, which is something we do already to kind of get an idea of the final wine, but to really make important bottlings out of that land, because it's extreme. 1,000 meters, that's very extreme, but it's so interesting to see how vines are coping on that elevation.
Wow, that is very interesting, huh? Now,
another big project that we have, and this is not really a project, but it's bigger than that, is that you ask about new wines and new things that we do. We actually have purchased a new fairly important vineyard in the Trento Dock area, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So in the heart of Trentino, an area known for sparkling wine. So I'm not going to say more about it, but it's 2017 that we purchased it, and 2016 that we purchased. 2017 is the first vintage that we started making, but I cannot say more than that. It's being released probably in 2024, and it will be announced then. But so that's a big new thing that we have started, actually.
Well, interesting. We'll just have to look out for that when that's able to be talked about. I don't want to press you and get you in trouble or anything, so we won't ask you anything about that. I'm going to ask you anything about that. Well, with some of those higher acid wines, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, obviously for your reds, you're doing some malo for stability and things like that. Are you using malo with any of your whites, number one? And number two, when you do, are you allowing it to just transition at the end of fermentation, or I know some winemakers inoculate malo to start before end fermentation? And if you do, whatever your decision is with that, what guides that?
Yeah. Okay. Many questions, but I got one. Let's see. Okay. No, we malum MLF is important for us in some of our wines, not in all of them. So for the reds, it's done. Yes. And we do it though together. So it's been inoculated, yes, during the primary fermentation.
Okay.
For us, it seems, yes. And when we decide to do MLF, it's always done that way. If a wine we decide, okay, for the whites, for example, because not all whites go through MLF, obviously,
right.
But for the wines, it's mainly actually only the wines that stay in barrels, those see MLF, the others don't. And but then we've decided, and we do it together during fermentation, because we feel that it's much more integrated.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's why we decided why we do it together, basically, right? And but then all the wines that stay in stainless steel, they don't see MLF, because that's where we want to kind of it's younger wines, and they're where we want to have this, shouldn't say pungent acidity, but kind of this strong acidity, right?
Right.
Exactly. But for the others, we inoculate and we do it during fermentation. Yes.
Well, it seems to me, and check me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me when those that are done during primary fermentation, it seems that they don't have that higher evident diacetyl component to it, that buttered component to it, which is a little overpowering.
Yes, the milky, yogurty thing. Exactly.
Yes. It seems to be
that's our experience.
Yeah, it seems to be a little more subdued and a little more integrated whenever it's inoculated during primary. Do you agree with that?
I agree. Yes.
Okay, good.
That's our findings. Yes.
Okay, I'm asking from a learning standpoint as well.
Yeah, no, that's something that we found. Yeah, no, I agree. I cannot say anything else.
What wines that you make are grape or wine is the greatest challenge to you to make a good wine from? Does that make sense?
Yes. And it's funny because it's a good question, and right, like you asked the question, that the two varieties that come into my mind are two reds, and they couldn't be more, in a way, they couldn't be more different, right? So I have on the one hand Pinot Noir. The whole world knows it's a very difficult variety, right? It's a diva in all its ways, and it can be some of the most expensive wines, right? Pinot Noir. And also in our estate we do some fantastic Pinot Noirs, and it's certainly a challenging variety. And on the other hand, the variety that is also challenging, but it's on price wise, it's the least expensive of all the reds that we do, is the Schiava, right? So everyone, loves Schiava. It's this fun, easy drinking red variety, in summertime, beautiful, almost no tannins. It's a very beautiful, easy drinking, approachable wine, right? But in the cellar, and sometimes also in the vineyards, but especially in the cellar, it gives you headaches because it tends to be so reductive all the time. So you have to be, you have to constantly be there and kind of treat this little thing that it doesn't get too reductive, right? And it makes me laugh, because on the one hand you have, the Pinot Noir, which is really so complicated, and but the Schiava, which is the least expensive one, but a great wine, it needs the same, it needs a lot of time. So it's funny, but it's if it's not reductive, the Schiava is fantastic. We love it. Yes, and it's
that's fine. I'll tell you, Schiava is one of those that I love almost as much as Pinot Noir. I find it in the right hands can be very elegant. I've had those Schiavas that have been very light and fruity and what I like to call picnic wines, but having those that have a little bit more, someone took a little more time and attention with them, they can be very elegant and very interesting.
Yes, totally. And back in the days, Alto Adige was mainly producing Schiava, right? Talking about like up until 30 years ago, that was the major variety. That has, come down. Now it's about probably around 10 or 11% of the production of Alto Adige is still Schiava. But the good thing, it's sad to, see so much Schiava being gone. But the good thing is that, it probably at the time it has been planted in areas where it shouldn't be planted. So nowadays, what we have remaining is really vineyards and wineries that really want, to highlight the characteristics of the variety, and hence, identify the areas that are suitable for planting Schiava, right?
Do you think the Schiavas are planted by those that are the wineries that own the land to take that risk? Because it seems that if you were just a grower and you were selling your grapes to someone who is producing, the Schiava doesn't demand as much of a price, right? So you're not making as much on that land. So
yeah, you got it right away. So that's the thing. So one of the reasons why we're losing so much also of the Schiava is also the fact that, let's not forget, Alto Adige, 70% of the production in Alto Adige is done by large cooperatives, and only 30% remains in the hands of family-owned wineries. Obviously, farmers that deliver their grapes to the co-ops, they get paid by weight and by, and Schiava on the market is being paid much less than other varieties. So for a farmer, generally, he would, he gets so much more money if the site is suitable for Gewürztraminer. He would probably. So it's so we still have some old Schiava and we keep it because it's a great wine. It would be such a shame to lose it, but we love it, and it's always it's part of our heritage, and hence for me it's important to keep it and preserve that.
Absolutely. Same or a little bit different question, and it could be the same answer. If it is, that's fine. But as a winemaker, what wine that you make do you think displays your abilities as a winemaker better than any other wine?
For me, it's probably, I would say, the Gewürztraminer. We are in the town of Chamin, which is what we believe in a way that the birthplace of the variety.
Named
it's
after
a variety
it,
that, right? And it's a variety that we have been making for so many years, and especially the wine that we do from the vineyard of Castel, which is this very steep vineyard, the only hill in the region, completely south facing. It's such a challenging place to grow the vines there. Challenging meaning because of its steepness. So that's the most steep vineyard that we have, 63 degrees, and complete southern exposure. So it's very hot during the day, but at night we're just next to the mountains and see huge temperature fluctuations. We're right next to it. There's a mountain that goes up 2,000 meters. So huge temperature fluctuations, right? Strong wind, very strong winds. So it's a very dry site. Actually, without irrigation, we couldn't probably grow vines because it's so dry. So we need irrigation there. We need, in Alto Adige, you actually need irrigation almost on all vineyards. Anyway, so to me, it's the Gewürztraminer because it's, you think of Gewürztraminer and you think of this, very perfumey, aromatic wine that sometimes can end flabby and kind of this. But if you have this perfect site where you are able to, have very low yields with and small berries, but they're very concentrated and the skins are very thick already. And then in the cellar where you see how much extraction you want to do. So you leave the wines in the press and you decide you should do 6 or 10 hours or 12 hours, right? You want to extract even more of the aromatics from the skins. And only then you start to vinify. We only do stainless steel in this case. And so to me, it's probably the Gewürztraminer. I think it's a fascinating variety that if you do it the right way, it's such an important and elegant wine that absorbs this in our the soil where it grows. It's in our case it's calcareous soil, so it's a lot of this calcium carbonate that it's being absorbed, and if you get this salinity and the mineral driven characteristics in an aromatic variety, that's for me that's the best. Because making a Gewürztraminer aromatic, that's easy. Just taste the grapes and you'll understand it.
It kind of checks all the boxes that you,
Yes.
It makes me smile that you said Gewürztraminer, because I can tell you that I think that is definitely not something that a lot of people would go into the store and ask for, especially beginning wine drinkers and things, because I think it's such a misunderstood grape, because it can be so just hauntingly good when it's made right. Yes, I agree with that. I just find it very
and then taste it aged. It's beautiful. It's amazing to see the evolution in some of the Gewürztraminers. And let's not forget that in Alto Adige, the Gewürztraminers are basically all dry, right? So they ferment to dryness.
Right. I'd say, so I'm going to ask you this too. If you were going to have your favorite Gewürz, what's your ideal, local meal that you would have with your Gewürztraminer?
My ideal local meals, I was thinking international, but local, I would probably stick to, in Alto Adige, we have many small farmers that produce cheeses. And in some of those farms, you get amazing aged cheeses that have a little bit more of the herbaceousness to it, very aged. I think that with a glass of Gewürztraminer is just phenomenal.
Oh, great. So international, I would have said, if you said international, like Thai food, Asian food, I find works very well with Gewürz.
Totally. Or even, yes, totally. I mean, or all the, in Italy, for example, with a lot of like raw seafood.
Oh,
and that's
like ceviche and
yes, that's amazing with it. That's really gorgeous with it.
I don't think I've tried Gewürztraminer with raw seafood, and I love.
You have to taste them. You have to taste if you find the high quality, the Gambero Rosso, so red so shrimp.
Mm-hmm.
We eat that a lot especially in the southern part of Italy. You eat a lot of the red shrimps raw.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And they have this certain sweetness to it, and it's beautiful.
Oh,
and you know what? It's funny because there's so much talk about food and wine pairing,
mm-hmm.
and sometimes for me it's sometimes a little bit too much, and I'm like, okay. But really, if you find, for me, food and wine pairing gets really interesting if you have a challenging wine, or challenging, I mean, a wine that has a strong character, and you want, and you now need the perfect food for it. But if you find that, it brings both things to the next level. And think of a Pinot Bianco. I mean, or Pinot Noir. You cannot really get that much wrong with your food and wine pairing.
Right.
But for Gewürztraminer, yes, right. If it's not the right thing, it's probably horrible. But if you find the right thing, it's both things become something different, something that is so much better than their things on their own. And I think that's when food and wine pairing becomes so interesting.
Well, you have inspired. I'm going to go get a good Gewürz this weekend, and I'm going to try that.
You should.
You inspired me.
Nice, fantastic.
So you're obviously very passionate about what you do, and I love that. I think it's contagious to the consumer when they find someone who's really put their heart and soul into what they do. So what would you like the end consumer to take away from their experiences when they drink your wine?
For me, wine is always is something very personal, something very cultural, and a sense of place. So what I hope when people taste our wines is that they feel it's made by a family that has been knowing their land for many years without intervening much, because we just know it because it's been inherited for so many years. And really making this having this sustainable approach where you really try to connect all the good things in just one bottle of wine, and that is a true sense of place, a wine that really tells the story of where it comes from and the people behind it. So that's, to me, that's what we're trying to do, at least.
Well said. And now from a personal standpoint, and this can be a wine that you make, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, but what have you been drinking lately? What is your, what type?
You know what? Obviously, being a winemaker and living on the estate, obviously a lot of the times we drink our wines, obviously, because it's just handy, because we have it just there. But if you want something different or something, and we're just entering the season, so what I was just actually having the other night, which I thought was great, was this beautiful Grüner Veltliner from Wachau and from Austria, actually from a producer friend of mine, Rudi Pichler, and I think it was his mark was just gorgeous. So yes.
That's great. I think that's another underappreciated wine. I love Gruner. I love it.
Great.
I love it at parties. I like to pour it and not tell people what it is.
I know.
And see what they say about it.
I love it in blind tastings too, especially when they're aged. They can be very tricky.
Yes, and I'm going to ask you another question from a personal standpoint. So winemakers are always very busy. There's always, like I said, always something to do. They're never just resting back going, well, I have nothing to do today. Right. But when you do break away from the winery, when you do get out and do life outside of work, what do you like to do? What is, I mean, do you
I love nature, and I love we have a lot of it in Alto Adige. So I love, going for walks and hiking in the Dolomites is something that is, to me, always, you hike up these extremely steep trails, and it's, you get on the top and you're like looking down, and sometimes those mountains, they open up like a flower, and that's, to me, that's something where you really opens up your mind. And I think nature is so beautiful, and that brings me to the next thing. What I love is really traveling, and I think there's so much nature out there that needs to be seen. So I love traveling, and especially I love all these quiet places where nature is real, where you can touch it and feel it.
Oh, that's great. It doesn't surprise me you saying that, because just having not been there and just seeing the pictures, it is absolutely breathtaking. Some of the scenery.
It's a very dramatic scenery. Yes.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, with the Dolomites, those mountains in the background, it's just unbelievable.
You have the mountains in the background, and then you have the cypress trees just in front of you. So it's just this contrast that is beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
So come and visit, Dennis.
I definitely have to. Let me ask you, and this can be part of the video or not, but are your wines locally, obviously they're imported. Are they, and they are available in
the US even?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
They're also in South Carolina.
Yes. Okay.
And they are imported, yes.
Perfect. So as people watch this, they can talk to their local wine store and they can say, they must order this. We need to get some of this.
Totally.
So yes. Okay. Good.
Please do so.
Yes. Well, Karoline, I really want to thank you for taking the time. As I said before, I know you've been busy, but it is from my own guilty pleasure to talk to winemakers. It really opens up so much more interesting and understanding viewpoint of the wines that they make, because again, we talked about terroir, but I think there's a lot of personality in the wines that stem from the winemaker. And I find that interesting as well. And I'm going to do one other thing that I was so interested in talking. We never talked about this. I think you probably know this wine, right? Oh.
See, I don't see it now. Hang on. You have which other Pinot Grigio, vineyard Castel, Ringberg?
Yes.
Yes, nice. Good choice. Which vintage are you drinking?
2018.
Oh, fantastic. Cool.
Yes.
Beautiful. What are you thinking? What do you think about it?
I think it's fantastic. I think one of the, and I'll write this, I actually have a article that's going to launch Wednesday. So this weekend, I'm going to finish this out. I was holding a spot for us to talk and for me to taste your wine, to put that in.
Oh, nice. Cool.
But one of the things I think that people have a misunderstanding about Pinot Grigio, because there's so many mass-produced,
totally agree,
light, crisp, acidic citrus water that comes out, that people don't really understand what a good Pinot Grigio can be. And it's got a wonderful layers of complexity with some wonderful orchard fruit and some citrus in there as well. But it has this lovely, interesting viscosity on the palate that I think actually even makes the acidity feel in a good way, feel a little bit less, because sometimes Pinot Grigios can have a bracing acidity.
I agree. Yes.
It's got a really nice, and a classic Pinot Grigio, that linear acidity hits you up front and just kind of is that backbone throughout the whole wine. Yeah, I find
Dennis, it's great. It's funny that you say that, because I always say that I had to travel to find out that Pinot Grigio also had this bad connotation, because we have been for us Pinot Grigio is such an important and high-end grape variety. I wasn't really aware that out there there was this bad back when I was younger. And so it's a noble grape variety, and if you have the suitable sites for it, and obviously with low yields, you get some fantastic examples.
What's got the nice, a lot of the more inexpensive Pinot Grigios, I find they hit you up front with the acid and the citrus, and then they fade relatively quickly. And a lot of the Pinot Grigios have almost a bitter quality on the end. This has that wonderful linear acidity, and the complexity and the acidity, really that citric kind of acidity that lingers on the palate, is very pleasant. And I could see it going extremely well with food. This would be a great food wine.
Yes.
Yeah. So well done.
That'll be great. Thank you, Dennis. Thanks so much. Glad you're saying that.
Karoline, I'll tell you honestly, it has been an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. And certainly, whenever we launch this stuff, I'll let you know, and I'll certainly send you a link as well to I'm doing an article on Alto Adige with just 3 different producers that we're doing. Okay. If I have any other questions, I'll email you. And
please go ahead. You have my email. Just reach out to me whenever you need something.
Yes,
beautiful.
And I really appreciate it. This has been an absolute treat. I'm so glad, Dennis. I love speaking with you today.
And I really, really hope you come and visit us, because we have some of the most Michelin stars per capita. I think it's just after Milan, so we're up there.
Yeah, that sounds horrible.
Right.
Karoline,
so please come. Dennis, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Ciao.
Yes. Ciao.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to Karoline's insights on winemaking. And as I said before, her contagious compassion when it comes to discussing wine. If you want to read more about Elena Walch Wines and see some of my personal tastings, go to the website, link below. And there's also more to the story of Elena Walch. So we're going to put a link in there so you can go to that website, look at some of the amazing story and history and some of the other wines that are available. So remember to follow The Bottle Talk and Elena Walch Wines on your favorite social media sites. Thanks for joining us.